Space is terrifying, just in and of itself if you really think about it. I don't know how else to describe it other than the fact that the universe is so massive that, for all we know, the observable universe might actually be the size of a grain of sand in the grand scheme of what the actual size of the universe is. I think the most damning part when it comes to space is just how much space there is. We live in a universe where we have random rocks flying around at 1,000,000 miles per hour, just blasting through a large vacuum that we live in, to the point where one impact could end all life on Earth. Yet the area of space is so massive that there is less than a 0.001% chance of anything hitting us, at least anything bigger than a baseball. In a universe with billions, trillions, possibly more planets, we are the only ones that are really out here. But why is that? There's a lot of ideas for this. Most of them are the fact that because of how light travels and how the universe expands, what we're seeing of planets that are billions of light years away is literally planets billions of years into the past. Or the fact that while it is highly unlikely, we might be the only living thing out there. There is a more terrifying theory, however. It's called the dark forest theory. It's an answer to the Fermi paradox, which is the idea of if there is a high probability of life being out there in the universe, then why haven't we seen anything? That's because they might be afraid. Imagine you're in a dark forest. You're alone, or at least you think you are. You're walking around, you're lost, but you're also seeking out help, or at least acknowledgement that somebody else is out there. But once again, you're in a dark forest. You're alone. You don't exactly seem friendly or sane, screaming out into the darkness constantly. If someone is out there, they're probably avoiding you, afraid of what you might do to them if you discover them. Or even worse, what if something finds you instead? What would they do to you? So for the sake of not getting harmed or killed, we all stay quiet. The problem with humanity is that we ruined our chance of that. The Voyager satellites 1 and 2 were sent off in 1977, some 20 billion miles away from Earth, I think at this point. On Voyager 1 is a golden record, which I do believe is playing a radio signal constantly as it travels throughout the universe. Playing such classics as Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, greetings in over 50 different languages, but most worrying to me is a cosmic map of the Earth's location. It is a minuscule, genuinely negligible chance that the Voyager 1 will ever run into alien life. But if it does, we just shouted into the dark forest. And in the case of Warhammer 40k, something answered back, and it was very hungry. The Tyranids are genuinely one of the most horrifying factions in 40k. Normally they're just referred to as hungry bugs, but the more I look at them, the more I came to the conclusion, the Tyranids are not just hungry, they hate us. But who are the Tyranids? Where did they come from? And why should you take caution in understanding that sometimes it's best if we don't look at the stars? More on that in a minute, because hello, I am Tyranic, the man in the broken tower, here to get a little existential, because did you know that 95% of all stars that will ever exist have already been created? Members get access to the Discord if you're chosen or higher, you get your name on a mini, and after a 1-year anniversary, I can bash you into my army. Alright, now let's talk about these horrifying ass creatures. So, crazy enough, between all the factions in 40k, the Tyranids actually have an origin. Well, it's an implied origin, but it's also heavily implied. Barbarous Dantiok is one of the only Iron Warriors to give his Primarch a run for his money. Loyalist to the Imperium of Man, Dantiok was horribly disfigured after fighting the Harad, and if you want to know a little bit more about the Harad and all that, go to the Iron Warriors video. After being told to cover his ugly ass face, Dantiok fashioned a plate that would go over it, and while it was still white scalding hot, he put it onto his face and then dunked his head into a bucket of water so it became a part of him. He went on to do such classics as telling a traitor warsmith to kick rocks, dropping a traitor titan into a pool of promethium, and then teleporting onto said warsmith's capital ship and taking it over like a pirate mutiny. Dantiok, for all the shit that I give him for being a loyalist, is a peak Iron Warrior. On the Imperial world of Sotha would a strange Xenospeakin be discovered. Theorized to be Necron tech, it would become known as the Pharaoh Speakin, and it had this insane ability to allow people to find, communicate, or even teleport to a location the user consciously or subconsciously desired instead of using the warp, and instead connected the 2 points of material space directly to one another. Think about that one bit in Wrinkle of Time, for those of you who have read it. Rather than journeying across the string, both points are merely brought to one another. I think it's quantum entanglement. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I read that book. Regardless, seeing as this was Necron tech, it was leagues above anything that the Imperium or the Eldar had, allowing for instant travel and communication across the entire galaxy, perhaps even the entire universe if it was put to that scale. Gilliman, of course, wanted to use this thing for logistic reasons, and Dantioch was eventually put in charge of the Pharaoh's Beacon, named the Warden of the Pharaohs, using it to recruit the scattered forces of the Loyalists to the Imperium Secundus during the Horus Heresy. Eventually, the Night Lords also found the signal and were going to try and use the Pharaoh's Beacon to find Conrad Kurz, who recently had just been ejected into space. A great battle ensues, and at the cusp of it, with no idea whether reinforcements are going to come or not in time, Dantioch elected to overload the Pharaoh's Beacon, embodying the true Iron Warrior mentality of "fuck you, I hate you, die." The Pharaoh's Beacon was overloaded, destroying the electronic systems, shutting down power armor. I think it even took out a ship at some point, but all of this was at the cost of his own life, but also at the cost of something far, far worse, because nobody would have thought that in the great vastness of space, in the dark forest, would this be mankind's shout, and something heard it. Tyranids most likely would have taken note of the Astronomicon given its immense psychic might, but the Pharaoh's Beacon becoming overloaded was shining a light for a brief moment. To quote specifically, "Hunger. Far beyond the fringes of the galaxy, there was naught but endless black. Past the last few stray stars plying their lonely track through the cold night, past the dead worlds and the fragments of galactic collisions billions of years gone, past the probes sent out by extinct races recorded in no history, past all that and beyond, there was a night sea studded with diamond islands of distant, lonely galaxies. Though incomprehensibly vast, the sea was not empty. Great behemoths of the deep lurked there. Into the eternal blackness, a flash of quantum energy shone out many times the speed of light. A brief flare, milliseconds in duration, projecting from an unremarkable spiral of stars. It was not mist. In the darkness, something of limitless hunger stirred in a slumber that had lasted for aeons. A million frozen and unblinking eyes saw the flash, dripping cascades of stimuli. Their purpose served. The eyes died. The entity processed the message the eyes provided without ever truly awakening. Automatically, instinctively, its gargantuan, dreaming mind analyzed the signal, comparing it against all parameters for one thing it sought: prey. Slowly, glacially, the great devourer shifted its course. And now, the Tyranids are here. They were discovered on the planet Tyran, and I don't mean discovered as in it was the first planet that they made it to. Discovered as in Tyran was the only planet that managed to document what ended up happening before all of them died. It's theorized that some xenospecies, mostly things on Katachan because of course, might be distant relatives to the Tyranids, but there's no actual factual evidence for this as of now. Eventually, this all culminates into the First Tyranic War, where the Ultramarines and their successor chapters would defend the Ultramar system, only to get royally decimated as this psychopath decided exterminating every world before the Tyranids could eat them was a good idea. Big bad Papa Smurf Marnius Calgar got 3 of his 4 limbs sliced off, and they had to eventually ask for merchant vessels and rogue traders to help take on the Tyranids in space combat, which obviously didn't go well for a lot of the smaller craft that didn't really have a lot of offensive capabilities. The only reason that they were able to even put a dent in the Tyranids was by sending an Emperor-class battleship and detonating its warp drives, literally Halo Reach style, sending the Tyranids straight to hell, which also means that Chaos now have a new Emperor-class battleship to mess around with. Oh yeah, the Imperium can't make any more of these, by the way. There are several more Tyrannic wars, up to 4 I think at this point, but honestly they don't matter, at least not in the grand scheme of things, because let's be real, a Tyranid invasion is a Tyranid invasion is a Tyranid invasion. They all kind of look the same, and they have all the same devastating capabilities. So what are the Tyranids doing in the galaxy? Simple, they're hungry. Tyranids work on the same insane methodology as economists. Everything must grow. Tyranids need biomass. They need to increase their numbers, and the way they get biomass is by obviously eating people. Okay, that's not actually accurate. What they do is that they harvest the dead, sometimes living, and they get turned into the literal primordial soup. I can't recall if this is the case, but I was told by someone secondhand, you're technically still conscious when you're a part of biomass until you get retooled into a new Tyranid, that or you become part of the hive mind. I couldn't find any definitive answers. That's sort of the point of Tyranids in 40k though, is that they're a new faction, relatively speaking. They've only recently arrived to the galaxy and have been causing havoc, because even the Leagues of Otan, who were released more recently in terms of the tabletop, have been a part of the galaxy for a very long time. That also reminds me, actually, speaking of that, the Tyranids don't have names, at least not like normally. The only reason that Tyranids are differentiated between units is because the Death Watch had to find a way to categorize them. After all, it's, you know, helpful that when you're shooting at something, you understand what you're shooting at. And this also heavily matters when it comes to Synapse creatures, which, you know, let's actually kind of talk about that real quick. How do the Tyranids fight? Normally, they fight as a horde. Unlimited numbers of Hormagaunts, Termagants herded together by Hive Tyrants and Tyranid warriors. Honestly, the Operation, Decapitation in Space Marine 2 is a very good way of depicting how Tyranids fight. Honestly, the entirety of Space Marine 2 depicts Tyranids perfectly. Hordes of shitty little guys reinforced by bigger, badder bugs, all following who we will call the Big Bug, which is also known as the Synapse creature. But what is Synapse? You see, the Tyranids in their most basic form, just like humans, are psychic to a degree. This matters because all Tyranids are connected to a hive mind. Is the hive mind a single entity, a group of entities, a collective consciousness? We don't really know. All we know is that it has a personality, and we'll talk about that much more later when we talk about characters, because yes, technically speaking, the Tyranids actually do have characters, but Synapse creatures, such as most big bugs, as well as anything with a brain clearly visible, are important as they give the weaker, smaller bugs a connection to the hive mind. A Tyranid doesn't need to be connected to stay alive, but it's helpful to herd the almost literal cats that they can be sometimes. In Space Marine 2, when you kill a Synapse creature, you tear the hive mind away from the smaller bug, which will either kill the smaller bug or leave them dazed enough and they have to get rebooted and get their bearings back together. This also makes it very easy for, say, the Death Watch to combat Tyranids, as they know killing the biggest bug first is very similar to killing a commanding officer. Sometimes the bugs get a bit too big and they get a bit crazy and it becomes harder to kill, but the same combat doctrine always applies. Kill the big bug and the smaller bugs will soon follow. Before getting into what makes the Tyranids horrifying, just like their weapons and units, at least to a little bit, because Tyranids are a lot more complicated than I thought they were going to be, we need to talk about how a Tyranid invasion in specifics works, and what it particularly looks like. The first step is infiltration. This usually is done in the aspect of a gene stealer cult, which they will get their own video, but we'll just go ahead and let's do this really quick. A gene stealer, one of these freaky looking guys, will infect Imperials with a strain of mutation that will eventually make them subservient to the gene stealer, which that gene stealer will end up being called the Patriarch. Eventually, as time goes along and as these people have children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a cult will form that believes their god will come to liberate them on their world and take them to paradise. Day of Ascension goes a lot more into this, and I am not giving this specific part justice. If you really want to learn more about gene stealer cults and how the Tyranids prepare planets for their arrival, go listen to Day of Ascension. In the end, the cults will ready to stage an uprising or weaken the planet in some way or another to call forth the Hive Fleet to come join them. As the Hive Fleet approaches, things get way more scary, as it turns out. If aliens invading your home and infecting your people wasn't bad enough, this is just even worse. The Tyranids don't have a warp presence per se, they have a shadow in the warp. It's less of a psychic power and more of psychic interference. Less blanks and more just messing with stuff in its entirety. Apparently the actual ability of the shadow in the warp is referred to as a psychic scream, of the hive mind quite literally screaming to disrupt any psychic powers. Think akin to what happens in the Night Lords trilogy. Well, spoilers, I guess, for a book series that's almost 10 years old at this point. Actually, I think it's past 10 years old. The hive mind will use the shadow in the warp not to make the Imperium weaker combatively, but because it will disrupt and block any attempts at psychic communication at long ranges. Astropaths, psychic messengers in 40k that are used to communicate across the galaxy, have been noted to literally croak on the spot when this happens. And because all humans have a soul and the presence of the warp, if a psychic scream is hard enough, it's able to fry the brains of weaker-minded people, because of course it can. With the population unable to call for help before it's too late, the Hive Fleet descends, blocking out the literal sun as swarms of living ships drop off hordes upon hordes of aliens. And some of you might be wondering, well, if it's just a bunch of bugs, why don't we just, bomb them all, burn everything down, etc. Anything short of exterminating a planet, basically. That's because Tyranids are hyper-adaptable. Let's say you load your gun up with armor-piercing bullets and it cuts through a wave of nids. So your entire company does the exact same thing, and okay, cool, you've beaten back an entire wave of bugs. The problem is that a Synapse creature saw you do this. It communicated with the hive mind, and before the entire horde could get beaten back, you saw a bunch of the bugs just suddenly retreat. 5 minutes later, new bugs show up with thicker armored scales and move in formations to minimize casualties on their part. You are subsequently eaten. No matter what you do, the Tyranids will find a way to adapt. Using fire, the Tyranids can withstand walking through flames. Gassing them, they created a new organ to filter out toxins. Find a way to starve them, these new nids run on half a white monster in a dream. In Space Marine 2, the opening tutorial mission has you virus bombing the atmosphere, and this only buys you a few hours because the Tyranids will just adapt to it. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is biomass. But what is biomass? Biomass is, in short, literally everything. Plants, animals, technically some minerals and metals, I think, but it's almost everything that isn't nailed down, and also probably the nails too. Tyranids take it, return it to their base of operations, most likely those giant ships of theirs wherever they keep their spawning pools, and toss it into the pool where, for lack of a better term, everything gets digested and turned into biomass. This includes dead Tyranids. It doesn't matter if you kill a Tyranid, because it will get dragged back, tossed into a pool, and its biomass will be used to create more Tyranids. Because of course it can. Your kill count doesn't mean shit if you're basically killing the same guy who's respawning over and over and over again. Eventually, this will start to have drastic shifts in battle as friendly deaths and enemy deaths still score the Tyranids points. The planet will be overrun. Everyone left alive will go into hiding, and then shit goes from bad to worse, if you could believe that. At first, things start looking grim. Forests start getting harvested. You notice less and less people or just anything in these desolate cities, whether it's like food, other just like bands of humans roaming around or random wildlife. You're not journeying far off from where you're at because you already know what's out there and where you're at is safe. That's when it hits you. You haven't seen a bird in forever. There's no annoying chirping. There's nothing flying overhead. The Tyranids don't just take what's standing and leave. They take everything. Tyran, the world that they were discovered on, was an ocean world. Tyran is now devoid of water. First they come for the people, then the animals, then the trees, then the seas, and before you know it, the air starts to taste weird. Everything is taken. When the Tyranids leave, if there was anything or anyone left alive, they're not going to be left alive for long, as they leave a dead world behind and move on to the next, just to do it all over again. Because all that fighting took up a good amount of biomass, probably. Time to get more. The sheer veracity of the Tyranids is an understatement. The Tyranids strip the goddamn atmosphere for nutrients. I don't know how else I can explain the insanity of this faction to you. One thing they do not do, however, is usually dig deep into a planet. They have burrowing units, but they're not like digging straight into like the mantle or the core or anything. There's very little reason for them to do that. It would require more work and more effort, which obviously means it would consume more energy and more biomass. And when the Tyranids just need to collect the living and fleshy things, yeah, going around and eating rocks isn't exactly their forte. I don't even think they consume Necrons, but I might be wrong about that. It might be a specific Hive fleet. Also, if you want to read a book that touches on what the Imperium does after a world is consumed by the Tyranids, please go read Belisarius called The Great Work. This is a plug because I love the Admech and Call is my favorite character. It is not the world's greatest book, but if you don't fall in love with Call by the end of it, I genuinely think you don't have a soul. I kind of want to talk about the Tyranid units, but genuinely, it's just variations of bug. There's a bug, there's a big bug, there's a bug with a gun, there's a bug with a... I don't know if that's safe for YouTube, actually. I kind of want to talk about Tyranids just as characters and just like what makes them fun in a way, if that makes sense. One of these being specifically the hive mind itself, but first on, I have to talk about the Swarmlord because he's so funny. The Swarmlord, Baller Supreme, turned Papa Smurf into a triple amputee. Remember when I said Tyranids just respawn? The Swarmlord and the next character I'm going to talk about are perfect examples of that. During a fight against the Ultramarines, it became apparent to the hive mind that dealing with Marines was far more work than it anticipated. So, it purposely created the Swarmlord to outthink and adapt its strategies against the Ultramarines. The arrival of the Swarmlord made the Tyranids from a ravenous horde to a dangerous, disciplined army. Aerial units began dispatching commanding officers and sergeants. Tunnelers began forcing Marines off of flanks. The artillery that was once haphazardly shooting into their units began to disperse their shots perfectly to keep forces separated from one another and vulnerable. And the best part is that when the Swarmlord showed up, it literally bellowed a scream and challenged Marnius Calgar, Papa Smurf, to one-on-one combat alongside its Hive Guard and his Honor Guard. And when more Marines showed up to aid Calgar, you know what the Swarmlord fucking did? The hundreds of dead Tyranids that the Marines were charging over They weren't dead Tyranids. They were put into a sedated state using Synapse and were only brought back to consciousness to bog down the Marines and stop Calgar from getting reinforcements, allowing the Swarmlord to drop a 3-piece combo on Calgar, the 3-piece combo being Calgar's missing limbs. Actually, I was incorrect. Calgar didn't lose 3 limbs, he lost all 4 of them. The Ultra Nugget, they call him. I've been told Calgar has lost his limbs and organs so many times that he might as well have died twice by now, but anyways, that's not the point. The Swarmlord is the MVP. The funny thing about the Swarmlord is that he dies a lot, but because this thing is hooked up to the hive mind and it's a Synapse creature in and of itself, pretty much any information it gains in combat, it retains for the next combat. It doesn't matter how many times you kill the Swarmlord, because it'll just keep coming back with new information and a better understanding of how to kill you next time. It's like if every super tactical droid in Star Wars was hooked up to one another. Not only do you have Kalani's brains, you also get Kraken's hands, like your fucking Anakin Skywalker. Quick aside, it's crazy to me that a tactical droid that runs millions upon millions of simulations in its minds and determines every single possible outcome decided that throwing hands with the Chosen One was its best course of action. And the funniest part is that Kraken didn't fucking hesitate. Kraken, my goat. Old One Eye is just kind of funny. In all honesty, he's like a holdover from old lore that's just really, really funny. Firstly, he's a Carnifex, which means he's dog shit. If you're in the hobby and you've heard the term distraction Carnifex, it means something that looks scary but isn't, and it just ends up drawing a bunch of fire onto itself. The thing about Old One Eye is that the Swarmlord has died and has been brought back to life again and again, pretty much living the lives of hundreds of peerless warriors. Old One Eye is apparently just built different. If I'm reading any of this correctly, he's just never died. This guy flips tanks because it's funny, but flipping too many tanks caused somebody to blast him in the face with a plasma pistol, and that's where he gets his iconic scar and half of his skull exposed. Apparently the shot killed him. Spoiler alert, it didn't. And how do we know this? Because the same exact descriptor of a Carnifex with half of its face missing has been spotted several times, and every time it's reported to be killed, it just shows back up. I don't know what's going on with Old One Eye, but apparently the dude just has like some insane regeneration and it just takes a while for it to kick in. He's basically Vulcan if Vulcan was a crab with a bad temperament. What purpose Old One Eye serves is completely unknown beyond him just being a vicious cunt that likes wrecking people's shit, getting his ass blasted, limping away, and just to come back again later. The last character I want to talk about is the best one, and I know I didn't really get to much in this video, but honestly, I'm looking at the recording. We're almost 30 minutes in, and I don't know how I managed to talk this long without even talking about units or weapons. I just want to go ahead and say, for the people who say the Tyranids aren't evil, their guns shoot living ammunition that burrow into people's skin and organs. The Tyranids are fucking evil. But the Hive Mind. Remember when I said the Hive Mind had a personality? Well, as per 40k's setting, it's a very spiteful, hateful little guy. For instance, when the Tyranids came, any attempts for Psykers to communicate or even peer into what the Hive Mind was met with instant insanity or their brains quite literally just blowing up. This was all during the Battle for Macragge, so Chief Librarian Tigurius decided, you know what, I'm built different. I'm gonna go ahead and peer into the Hive Mind and see what I find. First off, the Tyranids have a shadow in the warp to fuck with Psykers, and it fucks with them quite heavily. Regardless of all of that, Tigurius managed to see something, but the experience also left him a vegetable for a brief while. He managed to ascertain some sort of an idea of what the Hive Mind was, or at the very least he could predict how it thought. The Hive Mind fucking hated this, and sent as many Tyranids as possible and available to kill Tigurius whenever it could. I could be misremembering this as well because this is purely secondhand knowledge, but I also believe that when the Tyranids were going after the Blood Angels, they didn't just eat all the other planets on the way to Baal. They gunned straight for Baal and tried to take it out as fast as they could. I don't know what they did to piss it off, but if you give the Hive Mind a reason, it will absolutely run your shit. The Ghoul Stars are this segment of space in 40k that pretty much have remained a mystery, I think, up until this point. I don't even know if there's really anything talked about it recently. But the Tyranids ended up floating through some sections of it because all Tyranids really do, I think they travel across space by slingshotting themselves off of the gravitational orbit of stars, but they pretty much just move forward until they encounter something. I don't think they can turn. But whatever they encountered in the Ghoul Stars left them dazed, but also insanely pissed off that they started attacking things just at random. Not even for the sake of getting biomass. They just, if they saw something, they killed it. I don't know what their problem was, but it was so bad that Korn probably had to tell them to take a chill pill. I think by far my favorite interaction with the Tyranids, and specifically with the Hive Mind, was when the Eye of Terror tore open. What happened? The Hive Mind died. Every single Tyranid, for a brief moment, died. The psychic might of the Great Rift forming was an event that split the galaxy in half, and it killed the Hive Mind. For a brief moment, every single Tyranid in the galaxy just became brain dead. And I feel like someone's gonna try to correct me on this shit, so I'm gonna go ahead and say this right now. Brain death is not the same as being in a coma or being in a vegetative state. Brain death is that you are gone. There is no brain activity to speak of. Medically, legally, and physically, you died. It's not something that can be reversed either. That being said, the hive mind bounced back from this, and I think my favorite part about this interaction is that for once in its life, the hive mind felt fear. The hive mind created an entire specialized fleet of Tyranids to combat the warp and chaos the moment that this happened, because as big as the Tyranids are, as almost infinite as their numbers seem, they aren't. They need biomass, they need to feed, they have an end to them as much as their food does. The warp and chaos, that's infinite. It doesn't end. The warp is the literal afterlife. It's what comes after for everybody who dies. The Tyranids can't overcome that, so they avoid it, and when they have to fight it, they do the best they can. And I think that's what makes the Tyranids fun for me and fun for a lot of people. They are an unknowable, innumerable horde that ravages the galaxy, but they can be beaten, and they have, even if for a moment. They are not the end game of 40k. They're just another player, and while they're making good progress, one misstep could see them lose everything. There's a concept that floats around every now and again. It's the idea of the end times of 40k. The end times being the apocalyptic event in Warhammer Fantasy that literally saw the universe get destroyed. There is this meme I love, and it just goes as follows, but there's one small addition that I always love seeing people put into it, and it's that the Tyranids leave the galaxy. The idea that this ravenous horde of monsters being so afraid of what comes next that they choose to flee is so chilling that I just have to share that. It's fun when things are treated as a force of nature, despite the Tyranids not having any real books or characters. I think having them be a force of nature is what makes them fun and unique compared to all other factions. Sometimes you don't need the villain to be sympathetic, emotional, or deep. Sometimes having them be a whirlwind of destruction is what makes them fun to begin with. Hell, they're doing it with Vader nowadays. They stopped making him this sad, pathetic old man, and now he's just running people's shit in the Empire era. And I think it's great that we actually have something like that in 40k still. Not everything needs to be explained. To quote, "There is a cancer eating at the Imperium. With each decade it advances deeper, leaving drained, dead worlds in its wake. This horror, this abomination, has thought and purpose that functions on an unimaginable galactic scale, and all we can do is try to stop the swarms of bioengineered monsters it unleashes upon us by instinct. We have given this horror a name to solve our fears. We call it the Tyranid race. But if it is aware of us at all, it must know us only as prey." Thanks for listening. I'm glad I got the bugs out of the way finally. It feels good to probably have done one of, I would say, the most difficult factions in 40k. I know I didn't talk about the Hive fleets and I didn't talk about many of the units, but I really think both of those deserve their own separate video. I'll see about that at some point because there's other stuff I want to get done as well, especially because we're coming up on summer and I'm going to be less busy. I'll actually have more time to try and make more stuff, but I'm also disappearing in July, so we'll see how that goes. Don't worry, there'll still be videos. I'll have those prepped up before I go. As always, thank you to these channel members. Without you, my sacrifice would have no meaning, and now that you're here, it makes it all the more worthwhile. Big thank you to CBJor95, The Hog, Towoster, and Felicia. I still don't know how to pronounce it, you've never told me. Mount Papa 11, Josh from Allstate, Balding Dragon 62, Regular Alley, Suspendor, Javier Soto, Matt the Jam Man, Overdraft Perfection, and V, The Coffee Addict, Zachary Y, The God Emperor of R, Alexander McCabe, Ritz, Arctic Berserker, Omidium, and Captain Bubbles. And as always, an even bigger thank you to all these people. Oh, somebody new. The Great Sword Cowboy. Nice. Jokimitsu 45, Celtic, Human Spirit Indomitus, John Papa John, Icy Go 11, Crazy Axeman, Commander Apo CC 1119, Solace in the Void, Fat Nuts Man, Nameless School Ease, Never Lost Man, Gap G, Dism, Felix, Up Up Down Down Left Right, Istra, and Ape Brain Esquire. It's Xenos, so we're back on Space Marines next, actually. I kind of want to throw a haymaker for this one, but I also don't want to mess up the analytics just yet. I'll see what we're going to do. I feel like I should talk about the Blood Angels, but I also don't want to read Devastation of Ball right now. See you in a bit.